The plight of Zephyrus. Humans dared to help the aliens while every other race cravenly cowered behind weak excuses. Alien blood dripped from the walls of the devastated Andromedan colony of Zephyrus as the emergency meeting unfolded. The smug alien diplomats reclined in their cushioned seats inside the luxurious Galactic Council chamber, whispering and plotting. Primus, the Andromedan ambassador, knelt before the council. He trembled, his throat choking with grief as he described the desperate plight of his people trapped on their colony under savage assault by the merciless Krell. Human diplomat Michael Porter gritted his teeth, his fists clenched so hard his fingernails dug into his palms. One by one, the alien counselors declined to send help, citing flimsy pretexts. Michael's jaw clenched as he leaped to his feet, his voice booming across the chamber, shaming the cowards and rallying them to remember their duty to defend the weak. His appeals fell on deaf ears, and the council adjourned. Michael stalked over to the Andromedan, still kneeling in shock. Michael hauled the alien to his feet and gripped his arm, leaning close with his eyes boring into the ambassador's. "My people will help yours," Michael vowed. "No matter the danger or cost, you have an ally in humanity." The ambassador blinked, stunned by the human's intensity as a glimmer of hope sparked in his eyes. But the Krell were mighty. To intervene meant risking the survival of the human race. The Andromedans were not even allies of Earth. Michael prayed his people's courage would not lead them to destruction, but humans never shied away from doing what was right, especially when no one else dared to help. Michael's shuttle touched down on Earth, the weight of his promise to Primus heavy on his shoulders. He marched straight from the landing pad to the gleaming headquarters of the United Earth government, jaw set with resolve. Michael navigated the labyrinth of corridors with practiced ease, making a beeline for Admiral James Hawkins' office. The Admiral looked up from a holo display as Michael burst in. "Porter, I wasn't expecting you." "Sir, the Andromedans need our help now." Michael launched into his account of the Krell's brutal assault on Zephyrus, the horrifying aftermath, and the Galactic Council's shameful inaction. He paced the office, hands gesturing for emphasis. Hawkins listened, his brow furrowed. "I understand your urgency, but we have to consider the risks. Tangling with the Krell. Risks while innocents are slaughtered." Michael planted his hands on the Admiral's desk, meeting his eyes. "If the Krell isn't stopped at Zephyrus, how long until they threaten other worlds, Earth itself? We can't afford not to act." The Admiral held his gaze for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll take it to the Council, but I can't promise anything." "I'm not asking for promises, sir. Just a chance to do what's right." The call to action. The Council chamber buzzed with a dozen overlapping debates as Michael and Hawkins made their case. Some counselors argued for caution, pointing to the unknowns of facing the Krell. Others countered that the Galactic Council's cowardice left the UEG no choice but to act, lest they be seen as equally craven. Back and forth they went until finally, the vote was called. Michael held his breath as the tally appeared on the main display. The resolution for intervention passed, if only by a slim margin. It was enough. The gears of the Earth Defense Force began to turn. In what seemed like no time at all, Michael found himself on the bridge of the EDF flagship at the head of the task force, watching the shift into Andromedan space. Admiral Hawkins stood at the helm, jaw tight, as the first visuals of Zephyrus appeared on the view screen. Michael felt gut-punched. Calling the colony ruined now felt like a cruel understatement. Smoke poured from jagged wounds in the planet's crust. Continent-wide cities were blasted to rubble. The remains of Andromedan ships hung dead in orbit, charred and cloven. A strangled noise came over the comms. Michael realized it was Primus, seeing the devastation of his homeworld firsthand. The ambassador didn't speak as his shuttle docked, and he stumbled onto the bridge, but the grief in his eyes communicated volumes. There would be time to mourn later. For now, the Andromedans needed soldiers. Admiral Hawkins and Primus bent over the star map, going over the tattered shreds of the colony's defenses. Together, they sketched out a desperate plan. a perimeter around the last remaining Andromedan strongholds, behind which the survivors could regroup. Scout ships were dispatched to try to pin down the Krell's forces. It was a start, if a grim one. Michael looked out at the ravaged world below, fists clenched at his sides. "Hold on," he urged the Andromedans in his thoughts. "Hold on. Earth is here, and we will stand with you no matter the cost." The news hit the bridge like a shockwave. Scout ships had just reported back with urgent findings. The Krell were not acting alone. They had allied themselves with the Zorgon, a species notorious across the galaxy for their ruthless aggression and mastery of biological warfare. Admiral Hawkins stared at the flickering holo display, his face grim. Surveillance footage showed hulking, misshapen creatures rampaging through Andromedan defenses, shrugging off wounds that should have been fatal. These were no ordinary soldiers, but something twisted by Zorgon science into living weapons. Michael felt his blood run cold. The Krell alone had been a dire threat, but with the Zorgon's bioengineered monstrosities on their side, the odds against the humans and Andromedans had just gotten a lot steeper. Primus gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles pale. "We've heard stories of the Zorgon creations, plagues that melt flesh from bone. Soldiers spliced with the genes of a dozen apex predators." His voice was hollow with dread. "How can we hope to stand against that?" "We don't have a choice," Michael said, his mind already racing, trying to devise a plan. "We can't beat them head-on, not like this. We need to be smart, find a weakness, and exploit it." "What are you suggesting?" Admiral Hawkins asked. Michael brought up a star map, zooming in on a remote system. "The Zorgon bioengineering doesn't come out of nowhere. They need research facilities to develop it. Like this one." He pointed to a nondescript planetoid barely more than a speck on the map. "If we could infiltrate it, steal their data, maybe we could find a way to counter their enhanced soldiers and bioweapons." Primus leaned forward, studying the map. "I know this place. I've seen intelligence reports on it. The security will be formidable." "Leave that to us," Admiral Hawkins said. There was a glint of determination in his eye. "I can put together a team, the best of the best. If anyone can get in there and get the data, it's EDF Special Forces." Michael nodded. "I'll go with them. I know Zorgon systems. I can." "I'm coming too," Primus interrupted. Michael started to protest, but the Andromedan held up a hand. "This is my people's fight, Michael. I can't sit on the sidelines." Besides, he managed a tight smile, "You'll need someone to guide you through the facility. I've memorized the layout." Admiral Hawkins looked between them, then gave a curt nod. "All right. While you're preparing for the infiltration, we'll hit the Krell and Zorgons with everything we've got. Keep them focused on us, not on you." The infiltration. The plan was set in motion. Michael and Primus worked with the EDF strike team, poring over every scrap of intel they had on the research facility, rehearsing every step of the infiltration. Failure was not an option. When the time came, Michael felt a strange calm settle over him as he checked his weapons one final time. This was it. The shuttle streaked towards the planetoid, keeping to the sensor shadows as around them the battle raged. The humans and Andromedans threw themselves against the Krell-Zorgon lines in a series of brutal clashes, drawing their foes' attention. The infiltration team slipped unseen onto the planetoid surface, making their way swiftly to the research facility. They breached the outer perimeter with practiced efficiency, Michael and Primus in the lead. But as they pushed deeper into the facility, they found themselves facing more than just automated defenses and Zorgon guards. Primus cursed under his breath as a shambling horror rounded the corner ahead, all teeth and claws, and too many limbs. The Zorgons had let their creations loose inside their own base. Michael brought his rifle up, jaw tight. This mission had just gotten a whole lot harder, but they had to succeed. The fate of Zephyrus and perhaps the whole galaxy hung in the balance. Blaster fire scorched the metallic walls as Michael, Primus, and the dwindling EDF squad fought through the labyrinthine Zorgon facility. Abominations born of twisted science charged at them, all claws and teeth and pulsing, unnatural muscle. The strike team met them with controlled bursts, dropping the creatures before they could close the distance. But there were always more lurking in the shadows. They pushed forward, leaving the bodies of their fallen comrades behind. Each loss hit Michael like a blow to the gut, but he couldn't let himself dwell on it. Not now, not when so much hung in the balance. At last, they'd breached the central data core. Primus rushed to the terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. "Downloading now," he reported, his voice tight with pain. He'd taken a bad hit in the last skirmish, his uniform dark with blood, but he refused to slow down. Michael and the surviving EDF soldiers took up defensive positions around the room, watching the doors, the vents, anywhere the Zorgons or their pets might come from. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Then the alarms began to blare. They've triggered a self-destruct. Primus shouted over the cacophony. "We have minutes at most." A massive impact shook the room, throwing them off balance. Cracks raced up the walls. The ceiling, the whole place was coming down. "We have to move, now." Michael hauled Primus to his feet, ignoring the Andromedan's cry of pain. "Do you have the data?" Primus nodded, clutching a data drive in a white-knuckled grip. They ran, stumbling and clambering over rubble as the facility collapsed around them. Dust choked the air, mixed with the acrid stench of smoke and burning circuitry. A support beam gave way with a tortured groan directly ahead, blocking their path. Michael skidded to a halt, casting around desperately for another route. There, a side corridor still clear. He turned to shout to the others and froze. Primus had fallen behind, his wounds finally taking their toll. He met Michael's eyes across the debris-strewn space, and in that look was a grim understanding. "Go," the Andromedan mouthed. He turned, unslung his rifle, and began firing into the pursuing horde. "Primus, no." Michael started forward, but hands grabbed him, pulling him back. The surviving EDF soldiers, their faces grim. "We have to go, sir," one said. "We can't let his sacrifice be in vain." Michael wanted to argue, to fight, to do anything but leave his friend behind. But he knew they were right. With one last anguished look at Primus's receding form, he let them drag him away. They barely made it to the extraction point before the facility exploded, the shockwave throwing their shuttle like a leaf in a hurricane. Michael watched numbly as fire consumed the wreckage, burying Primus and so many others beneath tons of rubble. The grim return. The return to the main fleet was a blur. Michael handed over the data drive to ashen-faced scientists, dimly registering their excitement, tempered by the solemnity of the moment. The cost had been so high, too high. Reports came in from the diversionary attacks. Heavy losses on both sides, but the Krell and Zorgons had been pushed back. For now, Michael couldn't bring himself to feel any sense of victory, not with the weight of so many lives pressing down on him. The Galactic Council's demand for human withdrawal came as no surprise. Michael listened, numb, as Admiral Hawkins relayed the orders from Earth. A ceasefire, a withdrawal, as if they could just walk away from the horrors they'd seen, the friends they'd lost. But what choice did they have? The war had already escalated beyond anything they'd anticipated. To continue would be to risk an even greater conflagration, one that could consume the entire galaxy. And so, Michael found himself at a negotiating table, staring across at the impassive faces of Krell and Zorgon diplomats, trying to hammer out some kind of peace from the bitter ashes of war. It was a fraught process, one that left him drained and hollow. But in the end, they had an agreement. Not perfect, but a start. Before the human forces left Zephyrus for the last time, Michael made one final journey. He stood in the ruins of the Zorgon facility, now a tomb for so many, and tried to find words to say goodbye to Primus, to all of them. But what words could suffice? What could possibly encompass the magnitude of their sacrifice, the depth of his grief and his gratitude? In the end, he said nothing. He just stood there, letting the weight of it all settle into his bones, into his soul. This was a weight he would carry forever, he knew, a reminder of the cost of war and the fragility of the peace they'd bought with so much blood. When he boarded the ship back to Earth, he did so a changed man. His resolve had been forged in the crucible of Zephyrus, tempered by loss and sacrifice. He would continue his work as a diplomat, yes, but now more than ever. He understood the stakes. He had seen the face of war, and he would do everything in his power to prevent others from having to face that horror. As the ship lifted off, Michael cast one last look at the ravaged surface of Zephyrus. The scars of battle would fade in time, but the memories would remain, a testament to the courage of those who had fought and those who had fallen. He turned his face towards the stars and made a silent vow. Never again. Whatever it took, whatever he had to do, he would work for peace, for understanding, for all those who could not. The memorial and the warning. The memorial ceremony on Zephyrus was a somber affair. Rows of Andromedans stood in silence, their heads bowed as the names of the fallen were read aloud. Michael stood among them, his dress uniform feeling tight and constricting. Each name was a weight on his heart, a reminder of the terrible cost of the war. When Primus's name was spoken, Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He could still see his friend's face in those final moments, the grim determination in his eyes as he sacrificed himself to buy the other's time. It was a debt Michael knew he could never repay. As the ceremony drew to a close, Michael found himself approached by a group of Andromedans. They wore the insignia of the Andromedan military, but something about their bearing set them apart from the other soldiers. Ambassador Porter, one of them said, his voice low and urgent, "We must speak with you. It's a matter of utmost importance." Michael frowned but nodded. He followed the Andromedans to a secluded corner of the memorial garden. "We are part of a faction that opposed the peace treaty," the leader of the group said without preamble. "We believe that the Krell and Zorgans should have been completely destroyed, not allowed to slink away and lick their wounds." Michael's frown deepened. The treaty was necessary. The war was taking too high a toll on both sides. It had to end. The Andromedan shook his head. "You don't understand. We have intelligence suggesting that the Krell and Zorgans are secretly rearming. They're planning to strike again, not just at us, but at Earth. They want revenge for your intervention." A chill ran down Michael's spine. "What evidence do you have of this? Come with us. We'll show you." Michael hesitated. If what they were saying was true, he had a duty to report it to his superiors. But if it was just a rumor, stirring up fear and paranoia could jeopardize the fragile peace. He made his decision. "Show me." The evidence the Andromedan faction provided was disturbing. Intercepted communications, spy drone footage, reports from undercover agents. It all pointed to a massive Krell-Zorgan buildup. New ships, new weapons, and worst of all, new bioengineered monstrosities, even more terrifying than those Michael had faced on the Zorgan research station. He knew he had to act, but going through official channels would take too long. By the time the bureaucrats finished debating, it could be too late. Michael made a plan. He would infiltrate Krell and Zorgan space, gather indisputable proof of their aggression, and bring it back to Earth. He knew it was a risk, but it was one he had to take. With the help of his Andromedan contacts, Michael managed to slip across the border in a stolen Krell shuttle. He moved from system to system, gathering what intelligence he could. What he found chilled him to the bone. The Krell and Zorgans hadn't just rebuilt their armies, they had expanded them, drawing on the resources of dozens of conquered worlds. Their new bioweapons were nightmarish, capable of devouring entire cities, and their target was clear: Earth. Michael knew he had to warn the UEG. He plotted a course back to human space, pushing his stolen shuttle to its limits. But as he approached the border, his luck ran out. A Krell-Zorgan patrol spotted him. Before he could even attempt to bluff his way through, they opened fire. Michael's shuttle was hit, the controls sparking and smoking under his hands. He managed to coax the crippled craft into a crash landing on a nearby uninhabited planet, but the impact left him badly wounded. With the last of his strength, Michael dragged himself to the shuttle's emergency beacon and activated it. As he slipped into unconsciousness, his last thoughts were of Earth, of the billions of lives he had sworn to protect. The final battle. It was a UEG search and rescue team that found him days later. They pulled his lifeless body from the wreckage, along with the data drives containing the evidence he had gathered. That evidence would prove crucial in the days to come. Faced with incontrovertible proof of the Krell-Zorgan threat, the UEG and the Andromedans put aside their differences and marshaled their forces. The final confrontation was brutal, a desperate battle against an enemy that seemed to have sprung from the darkest of nightmares. In the end, they prevailed, but at a terrible cost. Worlds were left in ruins, fleets reduced to drifting debris. The galaxy had been saved, but it would bear the scars of the conflict for generations. Michael Porter was hailed as a hero, the man who had given his life to uncover the truth and rally the forces of good against the threat of annihilation. The highest honors of the UEG and the Andromedan people were bestowed upon him posthumously. Statues were raised in his memory, standing tall and proud beside the monument to Primus. Two figures who had started as unlikely allies and ended as the saviors of the galaxy. Though they were gone, their legacy would endure, a shining beacon of the sacrifices that had been made and the unbreakable spirit of those who had fought for what was right. The legacy of courage. The galaxy began the slow process of healing. Reconstruction efforts were underway on countless worlds, and the UEG and the Andromedans worked hand in hand to rebuild what had been lost. The Krell and Zorgans had been dealt a crippling blow, their threat neutralized for the foreseeable future. But the memory of the war and the sacrifices that had been made would never be forgotten. Memorials were erected on every planet that had suffered in the conflict, each one a testament to the bravery and resilience of those who had stood against the darkness. Michael Porter's name became synonymous with courage and selflessness, a reminder of what one individual could achieve when driven by a sense of duty and justice. In the United Earth government, new policies were enacted to ensure that such a threat could never rise again. Defense networks were strengthened, alliances were solidified, and a new generation of leaders emerged, inspired by the example set by Michael and Primus. On Zephyrus, the Andromedan people worked tirelessly to restore their world. The once devastated cities began to rise from the ashes, and the planet slowly returned to life. Primus's family was honored with a place of great respect in Andromedan society, their home becoming a symbol of the hope and determination that had carried their people through the darkest of times. As for Michael Porter, his story was told and retold across the galaxy. Schools taught of his bravery, and children grew up idolizing the man who had stood up when no one else would. His spirit lived on in the actions of those who followed in his footsteps, each one striving to make the galaxy a better place. Epilogue. A new dawn. Years later, the galaxy had found a new equilibrium. The horrors of the Krell-Zorgan War had faded into history, but the lessons learned remained ever-present. Humanity and their Andromedan allies continued to lead the way, advocating for peace, understanding, and cooperation among the stars. A new era of exploration and discovery began. Scientists and explorers ventured into uncharted territories, seeking out new worlds and new civilizations. They carried with them the legacy of those who had fought and fallen, their missions driven by a desire to prevent the mistakes of the past. On a quiet, unremarkable planet, a group of children gathered around a statue of Michael Porter. Their teacher, an elderly Andromedan woman, spoke with reverence as she told the story of the man who had dared to help when no one else would. "This is not just a statue," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years. "It is a reminder. A reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person can make a difference. Michael Porter stood for what was right, and because of him, we have a chance at a brighter future." The children listened, their eyes wide with awe. In each of their hearts, a seed was planted, a seed of courage, of determination, and of hope. As the teacher finished her tale, she looked up at the statue, her eyes misty with memories. We owe our lives to those who came before us, and it is our duty to honor their legacy by building a future worthy of their sacrifice. The children nodded, their young faces filled with resolve. They knew that they were the next generation, the ones who would carry the torch forward, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, guided by the example of Michael Porter and all who had stood beside him. The stars shone brightly above, a reminder of the infinite possibilities that awaited. The galaxy had been through dark times, but it had emerged stronger, united by the bonds forged in the fires of war. And as long as there were those willing to stand up for what was right, there would always be hope. The end of one story marked the beginning of another. The legacy of courage, of sacrifice, and of unwavering resolve would continue, lighting the way for generations to come.